As Savannah said, my name is Matthew McKernan, and I'm the horticulture agent for K-State Research and Extension here in Sedgwick County. My role is to do plant education related to all things ornamental, so all the trees, shrubs, flowers, and things like that. For those of you who may not be familiar with K-State Research and Extension, basically we are part of Kansas State University, and it's our role to take some of the research and knowledge that happens on the university level and bring that into the local community. So I'm a member of 10 individuals who are extension agents that teach all kinds of different things here in the Sedgwick County community. I focus on the gardening and horticulture section of our office, but we also have education related to food, nutrition, aging and Medicare, 4-H youth development, agriculture, and more. So excited that you're here with me this evening to take some of that university knowledge. And before we get started, just want to let everybody know that we, as part of K-State and Kansas State University, are an equal opportunity provider and employer. And so we're really geared and dedicated to reaching all members of our community. So we encourage you to participate in future events, just like you are tonight. But really, to jump into this evening, we really want to talk about fall lawn care. And I think the number one question people have when we talk about fall lawn care and our lawns in general is, why is it that the grass always seems a little bit greener on the other side of the fence? Whether it's just that house down the street or across the driveway, or you never know. There's always somebody that just seems to have a little bit greener yard. And tonight we're here to fix that. First of all, we have to be aware that, sometimes those lawns are a little bit greener because they're fake. You do see AstroTurf lawns from time to time across the Wichita area. But really, we want to have the greenest lawn on the block because not because it's fake, but because we're caring for it properly. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about tonight are really going to help you not only have success with your lawns this fall, but really be successful with setting up your lawn to look beautiful all year long. And so these are some of the topics we'll talk about tonight, really focusing the beginning of our presentation on why lawns are important and how we want to go about planting them. But then we'll talk about things like fertilization, weed control, core aeration, and more. If you've ever been in a presentation of mine before, I love to address questions as they come up. So please feel free to use the chat box tonight, that Q&A button, probably located at the bottom of your screen, to type in any questions, and we will try to take them as they come along tonight, and especially during each section. But I think you may be asking yourself, or maybe your friends and family later tonight or tomorrow will be asking you, why did you go to a lawn care class? Why should you care about your grass that much? And that's a fair question. And that's one of the things that we want to address right off the bat tonight, because unfortunately, when you talk about lawns, and especially if you do an internet search about lawns, you see all these negative things about turf grass and why turf grass is bad for the earth. You see things like, I love my family and the environment more than my lawn. And you know what? I do too. And that's okay. You should. But the reality is turf grass does so many beneficial things for our environment and our communities. Turf grass is a big thing in order to help reduce noise in our urban environments. Typically, having grass along the road decreases traffic noise by up to 40% compared to hard surfaces. Turf grasses across the world are also extremely important in reducing glare and increasing visibility. Turf grasses, just like trees, are going to be natural air conditioners. Typically, our turf grass lawns are going to be 30% cooler than surrounding asphalt will be. And turf grass is even 14% cooler than bare ground is going to be if you had nothing growing there at all. And in general, turf grasses help keep our grasslands at least 10 to 15% cooler than the adjacent urban areas that they border. In addition to that, turf grasses are extremely important for water quality. All the greases, oils, pollutants, chemicals that are out there, typically a lot of those are going to get bound up and caught in the thatch layer of our lawns, which is basically where the roots and the grass blades meet. And typically the great thing about our thatch in our lawns is it helps trap those pollutants, which allows the microbes then from our soil to be able to break those down and clean them out of our water sources in order to help keep our groundwaters and surface waters cleaner. Not only does it help with water pollution, but our lawns also help with air pollution. Typically every year in the United States alone, over 12 million million tons of dust gets kicked up into the atmosphere. And it's really blades of grass that help trap a lot of that and bring that back down to the ground rather than circulating in our airs. And one of my favorite reasons to love turf grass and to think about one of the benefits of turf grass is how much carbon dioxide turf grass captures and how much oxygen it creates. A 2,500 square foot of lawn actually produces enough oxygen and traps enough carbon dioxide every single year to serve for a family of 4 to survive off of that oxygen that's produced. When you think about 2,500 square feet, that's not much space at all. Typically, that's a 50 by 50 foot section of lawn. I think a lot of people have a quarter acre of lawn or quarter acre property, if not bigger. And if you think about that scale, just even a little bit bigger, a quarter acre of lawn on your property produces enough oxygen for 17 people to survive on a year out of the oxygen that's produced out of just that quarter acre of lawn. That's really pretty cool. When we talk about turf grasses, those are often some of the benefits that we don't think about. One of the more obvious benefits of turf grasses is an increase in property value. Typically typically homes that have an established lawn usually have a home value that's increased by 15% or so. So if the things that are good for the environment don't necessarily get you excited, we do want to talk about some of the dollars and cents things that might. And you didn't come here to talk about all the good things turf grass has to offer. I understand that. So we'll really start to get into taking care of our turf grass properly, because if we're not doing the right things to our turf grass, we really could see or not see the full potential in some of those benefits. And so when we talk about turf grass, one of the things that we really want to get clear tonight as we get started is identifying which type of turf grass that it is that you're growing in your landscape. Typically, turf grasses that we grow in our lawns are going to fall into one of 2 categories. Typically, the first category over here on the left is going to be our warm season lawns. Typically, those are going to include types of grass like Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, and buffalo grass. Those will be the 3 most common ones that people will see. And typically with these warm season lawn types, they are going to grow the best during the summer months. These types of grass are extremely heat tolerant, extremely drought tolerant, and typically a little lower maintenance. With these warm season grasses, typically they're going dormant during the winter months. And typically we really want to focus our care on them during the summer months. The May, June, and July timeframe is critical. Where on the other hand, our opposite alternative basically to the warm season turf grasses is going to be what we consider our cool season turf grasses. And that's going to include tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass. These cool season lawns are really going to grow best in the fall and in the spring, typically times of the year when the temperatures are a little bit cooler and there's a little bit more natural rainfall and moisture. Typically these cool season lawns, if they were in an unirrigated area, typically are going to struggle a little bit during the summer months, and so would naturally go dormant or brown during those summer months. Usually we don't see tall fescue lawns in our area going dormant during the summer because often people are irrigating, which is kind of what keeps them green and going all year long. But with our cool season lawns, these are primarily what we're going to focus on tonight, because these are the lawns that really benefit from that September and fall lawn care things that we can do to them. Tonight, we're really going to focus on tall fescue as the primary lawn type that we talk about, because that's what most people grow in our area and really across the majority of the state. So whether you have a warm season grass or cool season grass, the things that we're going to talk about tonight, the process is going to be the exact same for both of them. But if you have some of our warm season lawn grasses, Bermuda, zoysia, or buffalo, just remember the timing of the things that we talk about today will be different. Typically, the summer is the time that we would fertilize, core aerate, do all the things like planting that we're going to talk about tonight, really with the emphasis on tall fescue. And being in Kansas, we can grow both the cool season and the warm season grasses. Typically, if we lived further north, we'd only really be successful with the cool season grasses. If we lived further south, we'd really just have to stick to the warm season grasses. We're in Kansas in an area known as the transition zone, which means we have the opportunity to both grow warm season lawns and cool season lawns. But the reality is that also means that we can struggle with both types of turf grasses at different times of the year. The cool season turf grasses typically struggle a little bit more in the summer months, and our warm season turf grasses typically struggle a little bit more during the winter months. And so we talked about each type of turf grass going dormant at different times of the year. And here's a picture of a turf grass in March of 2016. And it's kind of hard to tell whether it's dormant or not. And what you're seeing here is actually a cool season grass, a tall fescue lawn. And the reality is, again, even though it's supposed to do best in the spring and in the fall, there are times of the year where our lawns may be less green or more dormant, and that's a-okay. Once those weather situations start to turn a little bit, this grass will green up and be geared and ready to go for the growing season. So with cool season lawns, we talked about tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass, the two that you see in bold and asterisked here. Those are really going to be the most common types of cool season lawns that you see in our area. And really, tall fescue is the #1 lawn that you see in our area because of all the cool season grasses. Tall fescue is really going to be the most adapted. It not only does well in the cool, wet parts of the year, but tall fescue is also going to be, of all the cool season grasses, the most heat and drought tolerant, which is why you see it so commonly planted. But there are other kinds of there are other kinds of cool season lawn grasses that you could come across. Fine fescue is an example, but fine fescue is very different than tall fescue. Fine fescue often has different names associated with it, things like creeping red fescue, chewing fescue, hard fescue. All of those are different types of fine fescue. But essentially, these fine fescues, if we lived further north, would be a great option. But here in Kansas, they are not quite as heat and drought tolerant as tall fescue is going to be. Same thing with annual bluegrass, annual ryegrass, or perennial ryegrass. These ryegrasses really cannot handle the heat and the drought and the rough extremes of summer. So if we plant these in our lawn as a cool season lawn, they're going to look great after we plant them. But the fine fescues and the ryegrasses and even some of the bluegrasses are really going to start to struggle in the summer months. And so I start with this because oftentimes we inadvertently plant some of these varieties of lawn grasses that maybe aren't as well suited to our area as tall fescue. And if we plant grasses that are going to struggle more, we are going to struggle more as we try to maintain our lawns. Because honestly, if these grasses aren't meant to grow well here, no amount of maintenance is going to have them looking perfect as much as we might like to try. So when we're selecting our types of turf grass, of all the cool season turf grasses, typically we want to focus on tall fescue as our selection. Tall fescue is also going to be our most shade tolerant grass that we can grow in our area. Like I said, fine fescue may be a little bit more shade tolerant than tall fescue, but it's not as tolerant of our summer heat. So as a result, tall fescue is really our best shade tolerant choice for our area. A lot of our warm season grasses, they really don't tolerate the shade very well. If you have a warm season lawn or prefer a warm season lawn, really zoysia grass is going to be the best warm season grass that's going to tolerate some shade. So with our tall fescue lawns and any of our cool season lawns, we really want to focus on September as the month to do just about all the maintenance we can. And that includes planting, overseeding, fertilizing, core aeration, and even weed control. And so tonight we're going to talk about all of those things and more. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind, though, is determining whether or not we plan to plant tall fescue seed or sod this fall or not. Because in either scenario, we can fertilize, we can core aerate, and we can plant this fall, but we have to be careful whether or not we use our weed control products to help either control or prevent weeds from coming up in our lawns. Because a lot of those weed control products may have the ability to impact the growth of some of our new seedling plants that we might be trying to establish. So with overseeding and lawn establishment, let's get started. Why September? Why is September the ideal time that I keep stressing here for fall lawn care? And just like this joke implies, it's all about timing. So with September, the soils are going to be warm from the heat of the summer. So typically warm soils cause any kind of grass seed that we put down to grow rather quickly. It germinates quickly and grows quickly. With September, typically we have warm days, but our nights are cool. So we get vigorous growth on our lawns, but we also have some hours of the daytime where the lawn is less stressed and has some reprieve from the cooler temperatures in the evening. And the great thing about September is we also have far less weed competition than we do in the spring. So we can be successful at establishing a lawn without also growing a lot of weeds in the September timeframe as well. And I've thrown this term around a little bit already, but I want to make sure we clarify what the difference between planting grass seed is and starting over versus the term overseeding. So anytime we talk about planting grass seed or starting over tonight, typically what that means is we're planting a brand new lawn. And in that scenario, we're starting with bare ground or bare soil. So typically, sometimes we have lawns, maybe we just moved into a house and it's more weeds than grass, and we want to kill all of that and start over with bare ground. That's kind of the scenario where we would be starting over. If we're using the term overseeding, however, what we're doing here is we're starting with an existing lawn. And in these existing lawns, basically we have bare spots or thin areas where the grass isn't growing very well. So when we overseed, we're taking that existing lawn and filling in the thin spots to really get a really thick, dense turf grass. So maybe your lawn looks like this. First of all, let me start out by saying, don't give up. We can turn that around and get it looking great. Because the reality is Kansas summers take their toll on all of our plant material out in the landscape, and our lawns are no different. So if our lawn does look like this is the ideal type of scenario where we want to consider overseeding, where we have some existing turf grass that we want to keep, but we want to fill in all those brown patches and dead spots. And I think, unfortunately, this site looks really familiar to a lot of people because we've had a lot of insect and disease pressure in our lawns this summer, maybe more so than normal. I think the most recent insect outbreak that many of you who have a tall fescue lawn have heard about or dealt with is the fall armyworm invasion. Typically, fall armyworms are a problem every single year in Kansas, but generally not to the extent that we saw them this past month. Typically, the fall armyworm is a tropical moth that actually lives in Central and South America and maybe southern parts of Texas and Florida. And this moth migrates north to Canada every single summer. And along the way, it lays thousands of eggs to turn into these armyworm caterpillars. And these armyworm caterpillars, like all caterpillars, are ferocious eaters. And over the past 3 to 4 weeks, we've seen them just devouring tall fescue lawns across our area. Another disease that people saw a lot of this summer was brown patch disease in their tall fescue lawns. And this is a disease that's favored by hot, humid conditions. And we have had plenty of that this summer. And because we've had hot, humid conditions, we've seen a lot more brown patch disease. And with the fall armyworms, for those of you that had it or may have heard about it, this is what it looks like. Typically, when you have fall armyworms, you don't have just 1 or 2, you have hundreds to thousands. And that's because each one of those female moths of the fall armyworm adult, they actually are going to lay 1,000 eggs per moth, and typically in clusters of 300 to 400 at a time. So usually when you have fall armyworms feeding in your lawn, there's not just 1 or 2, there's hundreds to thousands. And the problem with the feeding of this fall armyworm is they are such a ferocious eater that they really can turn an entire lawn brown in the matter of 24 to 48 hours or less. And that's primarily because they're eating off all of the blades of grass. And what blades of grass they don't completely eat, they chew off enough of that the grass actually turns brown because of the heat and having that water circulation cut off. But I think for most of you, hopefully, who had fall armyworm damage, typically fall armyworms don't kill the entire plant. Typically what fall armyworms are going to do, and you see in this picture, is they chew off the blades of grass, but they leave the crown or the base of the plant. Basically, the crown of the plant is just above the soil surface, and that's the growing point of our lawns. That's where all the new growth comes from. So the crown being right at the soil surface is why we can mow our grass off every week, and it still continues to grow because the growing point is at the base of the plant rather than at the tip. So typically our fall armyworms are just eating the top of the plant and not the crown. We could have seen scenarios where maybe you had more mature fall armyworms towards the end of their life cycle. They will sometimes eat the crown and all. We can also see the crowns being damaged by fall armyworms when we have large numbers of fall armyworms in our lawns. But the reality is the next week or two is really going to help us determine how much fall armyworm damage we may have had over the past month. And the reality is, hopefully for most of you, you'll see some new growth coming out of the crowns of your plant of the tall fescue lawn that you had before the fall armyworm started to feed. If you really want to help your tall fescue lawns that were damaged by fall armyworms, really try to give it some extra water, some extra irrigation, and maybe we'll get some extra rainfall, because that's really going to help speed up the recovery. People may actually see a little bit of additional damage from the fall armyworms now that the feeding has really come to an end in most areas because of the hot 100-degree weathers. You have a lot of feeding damage and then really intense dry conditions that could maybe make damage worse. But the reality is, hopefully most of you will start to see some recovery in your tall fescue lawns in the next couple weeks. And I think likely what you may experience is some bare patches or empty spots. But the reality hopefully is that most of our caterpillars only feed for about 2 to 3 weeks for our fall armyworms. So I think a lot of our fall feeding for the fall armyworms has stopped for this generation. But the problem is we can see 2 to 4 generations of the fall armyworm over the course of the summer. So typically a new generation forms every 23 to 25 days. And the generation we just saw was probably generation 2 or 3. We do have the potential to see one more generation of fall armyworms this year, but the size of that population is very much unknown. There's nothing to say that we're going to have just as severe of a fall armyworm outbreak as we did this past month, but likely we'll still see a few here and there. So the important thing for you to remember, and especially as we talk about planting, is continue to monitor for fall armyworm. Make sure that you're watching to make sure they're not returning to your lawn this fall. Because if we're overseeding and we're planting new grass seed to fill in some of the bare spots that diseases, insects, or the Kansas summer may have caused, we want to make sure that the fall armyworms aren't attacking those new grass plants, because they love the tender little baby grass plants that will start to come up after we've spread our seed. So whatever the reason we might have a thin lawn or have some patches in our lawn, we want to consider overseeding or either planting new grass or overseeding to fill in those thin spots that we might have. The important thing about overseeding versus planting a new lawn is because we have the existing grass already in our lawn to some extent, we need to use about half as much grass seed if we're overseeding versus if we're planting a brand new lawn. And that's because we have existing turf grass already growing, so we account for that being about half of the grass seed we needed to spread. But whether you're planting a new lawn or overseeding, typically now is the ideal time to get started. You can plant ideally anywhere between late August to October 15th as the time frame to plant tall fescue grass seed. Typically, if you plant in late August, you're going to get much quicker germination. Your grass seed is going to start to grow in 3 or 4 days versus maybe a week to 10 days later on in the fall. But on the same hand, you are going to have to provide more water in the late August timeframe versus if you wait till September. Because by mid-September, again, typically our temperatures are cooler, and so the grass and the soil is not going to dry out quite as quickly as it would on 100-degree days like today. But ideally, we want to get our grass seed planted by October 15th so that we give our grass plenty of time to grow, to germinate, and be established before we really get to the cold parts of our middle of winter. So if we're going to plant grass seed, the first thing we want to consider is the quality of our soil. And typically, one of the ways that we evaluate that quality is by doing a soil test. You can do your soil tests through any of your local extension offices around the state, but basically what the soil test does is it detects invisible problems in the soil. It tests our soil nutrient levels, which by looking at the soil, we often can't identify whether it's high in one nutrient or low in another. So if you have time and plan to really revamp your lawn this fall, you might consider a soil test. I would encourage you though to plan ahead because it often does take 4 to 6 weeks to mail off the results, get the results back, and for having an extension agent like myself sit down with that data and actually write you recommendations for fertilizers based on the results that we get back from the lab. If you're going to plant a new lawn, though, the important thing with getting a soil test is it's much easier to make big changes to things like the pH or the potassium or phosphorus levels in your soil by applying those products before you plant, because those products often are really going to do more good for your soil if we have the ability to till them into the existing soil or get them planted a little deeper in the soil. But once we get our grass planted, we can still add all of those things, but it's just much harder to do, and we have many less options to do it. Typically in Kansas, most of our phosphorus and potassium levels are going to be high. So in most cases, a starter fertilizer when we're planting grass seeds isn't required, but it typically is going to help. Usually our starter fertilizers are going to encourage rapid germination of our grass seeds, and it makes sure that those nutrients that the grass seeds need are right there on the soil surface, right where our grass seeds are getting planted. Again, typically we would recommend a soil test before you do your planting of your seed, again, because most people don't really need much additional phosphorus or much additional potassium. Usually it's just nitrogen that's our limiting factor. If we're wanting to completely start over with our lawn, and I've seen some of my neighbors in my neighborhood doing this, if we want to completely start over, what we may want to consider is applying glyphosate or products that contain the active ingredient glyphosate to kill the whole entire lawn. And basically what these products are going to do is they're going to kill any green plant material that's growing that we apply it to. And the nice thing about the active ingredient glyphosate, unlike other products, is typically it's going to be safe to replant our lawn within 1 to 3 days of making that application. So if we do these glyphosate applications to kill any weeds or areas that we want to completely start over in our lawn, it's going to be best to do that about 2 weeks before we pick the date that we want to plant that grass seed. If we're overseeding, we probably don't want to recommend using glyphosate because, again, it will kill any green plant material that it's applied to. So if you're going to overseed, basically the best thing you can do is to try to mow your lawn a little bit shorter right before you plant. Ideally, if you mow about 1 inch to 1.5 inches tall, that is going to allow more light to penetrate down to the soil, which is just going to give that grass seed that you plant a much better head start as it starts to grow. Again, we want to make sure that we're careful if we do spray products on our lawns to control weeds before we plant and even directly after we plant, because depending on the product, they may not be safe to overseed for an X number of days after application. So we want to make sure we carefully read the product label, and we'll discuss this a little bit more when we get to the weed control section of tonight's presentation. For soil preparation, kind of step 2 of the planting process, we want to add or adjust any of the nutrients levels or apply fertilizers or compost, adjust grades or slopes in the lawn before we spread our seed. And I want you to pay special attention for the next 5 to 10 minutes here, because this is the most important step of planting a new tall fescue lawn this fall, and that is purchasing new grass seed. Do not be fooled by all the fancy advertising and the silly things you'll see on grass seed labels or even the price of the grass seed, because you purchase the quality or you pay for the quality that you get. And so we want to make sure that we understand what's in our grass seed and that we're purchasing what's going to be successful and not what's going to struggle during the heat of the summer. So again, the number one most important thing for planting is going to be purchasing a high quality grass seed. And it's easy to judge a grass seed by what's on the outside of the bag, but it's really on the inside of the bag that counts. It's what's on the inside that matters. Because not all grass seeds are the same. So we really want to start with a high quality grass seed, because picking grasses that can be successful in Kansas will just increase your success with your lawn. So we really focused on wanting to plant tall fescue as the best cool season grass that's adapted for our area of the state. And with tall fescue, one of the types of tall fescue or varieties is K31. Many people are familiar with because this variety has been around forever. Typically is going to be a little bit more disease tolerant and often a great choice for low maintenance areas. The downside to K31 is it's typically a little bit wider of a leaf blade, so it's a little coarser of a texture of a lawn. And really there's new and improved varieties of tall fescue out there. So typically when we're recommending purchasing grass seed, unless you have large low maintenance areas, we really are going to encourage you to look for these turf type tall fescue varieties. Basically, these are new and improved varieties that have better color, better density, better disease resistance, and a finer texture. Each variety has its own unique characteristics. So often what we're going to recommend you look for when you go out to purchase a tall fescue grass seed is to look for a tall fescue blend. And essentially a blend is going to be a mixture of 3 to 5 different tall fescue varieties all mixed together in that one bag. Often the blends of tall fescue that you're going to find are going to be varieties that we've recommended and we've researched through our local K-State research across the state. The exact varieties that you'll find in tall fescue blends are going to vary from year to year, but the tall fescue blends are an excellent choice for just about every homeowner. And so when you go to look at the bag of grass seed, you'll find or identify a tall fescue blend by looking at the label. And here you see there's Avenger 2 tall fescue, there's Firecracker SLS tall fescue, there's Titanium tall fescue, there's Spider LS tall fescue, and there's also Screamer LS tall fescue. Each one of these 5 types of tall fescue are a different variety, but all 5 of them are included in this one bag of grass seed. So you have at least 3 up to 5 varieties of tall fescue all mixed together in this one bag of grass seed that you would purchase, and that's ideal. But beyond just looking at what type of grass seed is in the bag, it's also important to see what other hidden surprises you might find in the bag of grass seed as well. And usually those surprises are going to be labeled as weed seeds or other crop. You'll often see both of those in the label. And the reality is we can try to grow the desirable plants like flower seeds, or specifically here are grass seeds. But those weed seeds take any opportunity of even the crack in the sidewalk to take off and grow. And so we want to make sure that we're not planting those weed seeds while we're sprinkling our grass seed, because it's maybe mixed in there by surprise. So when we are looking at our bags of grass seed, we want to pay special attention to the section that's called weed seeds and the section that's called other crops, because typically it's not going to tell you what those weed seeds are or what those other crop seeds are. Typically, other crop refers to any other variety or type of grass that's grown unintentionally. And often those are going to be pasture grasses or weedy grasses. They're going to decrease the quality of our lawns. Usually some of the weedy grasses or other crop seeds we see mixed in are things like orchard grass or bluegrass. And again, the problem with these grasses are they're perennial weeds, or they're perennial grasses. They're going to come back every year once we plant them. And we can't control them selectively once they're planted. And they're going to be different colors. They're going to grow at different rates. And so they're going to make your lawn look patchy if we accidentally plant these grass seeds. So when you are purchasing your grass seed, no matter where you go to purchase it, look for the grass seed label. Typically it's on the top of the bag. Sometimes it'll be on the bottom or in one of the corners of the bag. But every single bag of grass seed you can purchase legally has to have a label to tell you what's in that bag. And we want to make sure that we pay special attention to not only what types of grass are in that bag, but also the percent of other crop and the percent of weed seed. So I want to take just a few minutes to look at a couple of grass seed labels. These are just random grass seed labels of tall fescue blends to kind of show you how to read the label and what to look for and what not to look for when you're purchasing your grass seed. Typically, our grass seed is going to have a name or a branded name. In this example, this grass seed label is for Kansas Excalibur Tall Fescue Blend. It's going to have information about the manufacturer, who packaged it and where, but really down here is where we really want to focus on. Here under the component section, these are going to be the types of grass seeds that are intentionally bagged up in this bag. So here we have a variety of tall fescue called Reunion, a variety called Compete, and a variety of tall fescue called Stetson II. And this means that there's 3 varieties of tall fescue seed in this 50-pound bag. So this would be a blend because it has at least 3 to 5 different varieties of tall fescue. The percent purity, that number essentially tells you what percentage of each of these varieties make up that bag. So in this example, about 1/3 of the bag is Reunion Tall Fescue, 1/3 of the bag is Compete Tall Fescue, and about 1/3 of the bag is Stetson II Tall Fescue. Basically, with them all being at about 33%, they're all going to essentially be mixed in evenly in the bag. Another number that we'll see on the bag is percent germ, and this stands for germination. Basically, the germination is how many of those seeds in the bag are alive and viable. How many of them will grow when planted under ideal conditions? Ideally, in a good quality grass seed, you're going to find a germination percentage between maybe 90 and 95%. Rarely are you ever going to see a percent germination that's 100%, because no manufacturer is going to guarantee that every single grass seed in that entire 50-pound bag will grow if you were to meticulously plant them all and try to get them to grow. So like I said, 90 to 95% is an excellent germination, and that just tells you that the majority of the grass seeds that you're buying in the bag are in good condition and are going to grow. The older the grass seed gets, and maybe we have grass seed from last year, that percent germination is going to go down from when it was tested, but it really depends on how that grass seed was stored to determine how good or not good that grass seed will be when you try to grow it. Often our grass seed labels are also going to tell you where the grass seed was grown. In this case, all three of these varieties were grown in the state of Oregon, which is really where you're going to find most grass seed comes from. But down here is where we're going to find other ingredients. The first thing you see right here along the stitch is the percent other crop. And this is going to be 0.00%. This is the ideal scenario to have 0% weed seeds in the bag. The next thing you're going to see down here at the bottom is percent weed seeds. Again, 0.00%, ideally the amount of weed seeds that we want to see in the bag. You'll always typically also see a line that says inert matter or inert ingredients. Typically, these are other things that are applied to the grass seed or in the bag that keeps the grass seed from sticking together and just makes it easy for you to spread across your lawn. So we typically don't worry too much about what that inert matter is, because it's basically there to help you spread that grass seed easily once you get that bag home. If there are noxious weeds present in the bag, it will tell you typically what those noxious weeds are. And again, because we have 0% weed seeds, there are no noxious weeds in this bag, which is ideal. We'll switch up the grass seed label back to the one we looked at a minute ago. We talked about it having 5 different varieties of tall fescue. So that again is ideal because that makes it a tall fescue blend. So if one of these varieties struggles, hopefully the other 4 will kick in and do better in the shade or do better in the sun or do better with disease pressure. Here you'll see the percent purity. We definitely have a little bit more. 25% of this bag is Avenger 2 and only 14% of the bag is Screamer. But again, they're all fairly evenly mixed together, which is good. Here we see a percent germination. That means 90% of this bag of grass seed is going to grow if we plant it. And again, 0% other crop and 0% weed seed, which is ideal, what we want to look for. I will tell you up front, you're going to pay for the price on these high quality grass seeds a little bit more than you will for some of the cheaper grass seeds that have lower quality products, but you will be far more successful with these higher quality grass seeds. One of the things I really want to harp on here on the weed seeds and other crops is the percentages, as you see there on the bag, is not the percentage of the number of seeds, it's the percentage of those seeds by weight. And typically the other crops are not specified on the label unless they make up 5% or more of the total weight. So you really have no idea what those other weed seeds are until you plant them and they start to grow. So I think the question then becomes, how much is too much of these weed seeds or other crops? And that's a difficult question to answer, but typically our tolerance is very low because it's going to depend on what that other crop actually is. It's going to depend on your tolerance for weeds in your lawn, and it's also going to depend on the overall amount of weed seeds that are there. So some of our weed seeds may be things that are relatively harmless, like annual ryegrass, that's going to grow very quickly and give you a green lawn very quickly, but isn't going to last or survive in Kansas. They could be things like orchard grass or bluegrass, though, where they're going to come back every year. And again, typically turn brown in the summer because they're not heat and drought tolerant. And so unfortunately, there's no way of knowing what that other crop is. And so we really want to focus on having as little percentage of those crops as possible, because it's the percentage of those weed seeds and percentage of other crop by weight in the total bag rather than the number of seeds. So if you've ever held tall fescue grass seed in your hand, you know how small those grass seeds are. You can see it here in the picture. But the reality is our weed seeds are always even smaller. So here you can see a white clover seed. This is the size of a white clover seed compared to the size of a tall fescue seed. So our weed seeds oftentimes are going to be like dust. And so when we consider the weight of those weed seeds and the number of seeds that it takes to actually get a measurable amount of weed seed weight, it's going to take way more white clover seeds, about 800,000 white clover seeds to equal 1 pound of white clover, where because the tall fescue seeds are bigger, 1 pound of tall fescue is 200,000 seeds. So in 4 pounds of tall fescue seed, you actually have the same number of seeds that you would in 1 pound of in 1 pound of white clover. So again, it really does not take much of a percentage of these weed seeds to have a large number of seeds in the bag. So ideally, we want the grass seed to have 0% or as close to 0 as possible of other crop and weed seeds. A good quality grass seed, though, is typically going to have 0.01% or less. That's really the biggest number we probably want to tolerate, because even as much as half of 1% can really have a large number of weed seeds where the actual weed seeds may outnumber the total number of grass seeds in the bag. Another easy way to tell this is to look for the certified seed label. Essentially, this means the seed is certified to be weed-free seed and other crop seed-free. So that's a good indicator that you're not going to have those things surprise you later on. But the unfortunate reality is it's so easy to be fooled when we look at the advertising on the bag versus looking at the label. I went out here and taken pictures at a lot of our big box stores, grocery stores, all the kinds of places where you see grass seed being sold. And these are beautiful bags. They look like, oh, these are all good options for what we might want to plant. But the reality is when you look at that label section of the bag, you're going to be extremely disappointed with what you find. None of these 3 bags here have any tall fescue grass seed in them at all. Actually, the majority of all of them is going to be ryegrasses, which aren't going to handle the summer heat, and quite a bit of fine fescue as well. You do see a little bit more Kentucky bluegrass in all 3 of these, but again, none of them have any tall fescue, which is going to be our most heat and drought tolerant cool season lawn. You're also going to see some of these, like this sun and shade mix, have 1% other crop. So there's a large number of weed grassy seeds in there, as well as the grass seeds that we know we're planting. If we look at the example of this label here for this sun and shade mix, again, the branding to this sounds great because we often have both sun and shade. But again, there's no tall fescue anywhere on this label. We have ryegrasses, we have 3 fine fescues, we have 2 Kentucky bluegrasses, but no tall fescue. We also have a pretty large percentage of other crop, about 0.25% other crop seed here, which are going to be weedy grasses that we're actually planting when we spread this grass seed. The only one of those bags in the picture that I showed you that had any tall fescue in it at all is this grass seed here that's called a tall fescue blend. This one actually has 7 varieties of tall fescue, which is great. We want to have that diversity. But again, some of the problems with this grass seed is it has 1.5% other crop. We know 1.4% of that other crop is going to be ryegrass, but we don't know if that's annual ryegrass that's going to die, or if it's going to be perennial ryegrass that comes back and causes problems year after year after year. This bag also tells us that in the 0.1% weed seed, we do have quite a bit of annual bluegrass, but we don't know what else besides the annual bluegrass is part of that weed seed. So really, please do take some time to look at the grass seed when you purchase it and be willing to spend a little bit more money for a high quality grass seed. If you plant good grass in the beginning, you will have more success all year long than if you plant a poor quality grass seed that's not as well adapted to our area. The other thing about grass seed is it's going to be more expensive this year. There's a lot of supply and demand issues. and especially getting transportation of grass seed from Oregon into Kansas and other parts of the country because of some of the wildfires and the inability of trains to be able to run through those fires. So my encouragement to you is if you're going to purchase grass seed, do it early, go to your local garden centers and nurseries and purchase it while they still have plenty in stock. When we're trying to figure out how much grass seed we need at planting, if we're planting a brand new lawn, we're starting over, typically we need 6 to 8 pounds of tall fescue for every 1,000 square feet that we're going to plant. If we're overseeding, again, we're using half of that amount, so we only need about 3 to 4 pounds of tall fescue seed for every 1,000 square feet that we're going to plant. The important thing here is don't plant too much grass seed. It's way too easy to sprinkle too much and overcrowd the grass seed. And the problem with this is it leads to more disease problems and it leads to stress in our lawns because it's competing with itself because the grass seed is planted too thick. On the other hand, we also don't want to plant too little grass seed because then our lawns are thin and clumpy, which definitely isn't attractive as well. So really try to get 6 to 8 pounds per 1,000 square feet on bare ground areas and about 3 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet if we are planting in an existing established lawn. Ideally with tall fescue, we want to get as good of soil to seed contact as possible. Ideally, we want to have that grass seed planted just below the soil surface, about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch deep. And there are lots of different ways that we can go about accomplishing that. One option is to rent a machine called a slit seeder. And essentially, this is a machine that has blades that slice a hole slice a hole 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch deep. It has a hopper on here where you can put your grass seed and it drops the grass seed directly behind the blade into those holes. And then there's a wheel on the end that actually kind of closes that hole up and packs that grass seed just under the soil surface. A verticutter is another option. Usually we use this tool to remove thatch in our lawns, but basically a verticutter is a machine that is going to have solid blades underneath that are going to rough up the soil surface. So what we would do is we would run this verticutter across the lawn, remove any of the thatch that it pulls up. We would then go back with a spreader and spread the grass seed. And ideally, if we ran this verticutter across the lawn one more time after we spread the grass seed, this is just going to mix the soil one more time and kind of get that grass seed a little bit deeper into the soil surface, into that 1/4 inch to 1/8 of an inch deep range. Another option for machines that we could utilize would be a core aerator. And this is going to be a great option because this punches about a 3-inch deep hole into our lawn. And we'll talk about core aeration and its benefits a little bit later. But we can use this lawn to also help us plant grass seed by core aerating our lawn, punching those holes, and then broadcasting the seed once those holes are punched. Another option is a rototiller. This is going to be if you are wanting to completely start over. You would use the rototiller across your soil. Typically, you'd have to go back with a roller and kind of lightly pack that soil down. And then you would spread your grass seed across that surface. It's really going to be helpful if you lightly rake that grass seed into the surface of your loosely tilled soil, often with a leaf rake, in order to kind of get that 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch depth. And last but not least, the free version here is to take your shovel, take your rake, break up that soil surface by hand, and just kind of loosen the crust of the soil so that it's a little bit easier for that grass seed to settle into the soil when you water for the first time after spreading your grass seed. For best results when you're spreading your grass seed, we're going to recommend that you apply your grass seed in partial rates in multiple directions. Basically, we're going to use the same total amount of grass seed, but we're going to apply it a little bit at a time to help us avoid missing areas completely and bare patches showing up in our lawn. So what this looks like is we're going to use this same 6 to 8 pounds of grass seed on a bare soil area, but we're going to apply it in 2 passes. So the first pass, we're going to take half of that amount of grass seed that we want to apply, so 2 to 3 pounds in this scenario, and we're going to use our spreader to go north and south across the lawn. That's going to be pass number 1. Pass number 2, we're going to take the remaining amount of grass seed, the remaining 2 to 3 pounds of seed, and we want to go across our lawn in an east and west direction. And by crisscrossing our lines, what we're doing is we're ensuring that none of our lawn is skipped or we didn't go too far apart between passes and leave bare spots that show up in the soil. Beyond getting the seed planted, watering is really then the second most critical thing when it comes to planting and overseeding. Typically with our lawns, once the grass seed has started to germinate, it cannot dry out, otherwise it's going to die. So we want to make sure that we keep the soil moist so that we don't have any of that happen. We want to make sure that we water gently so that we don't wash that grass seed away and maybe get it pooled up and create bare spots. And immediately after we plant that grass seed, we really want to soak the lawn several inches deep so that there's good ground moisture for the roots to be able to grow down into. Ideally, with newly planted grass seeds, we're watering it frequently, but we're not keeping the soil waterlogged. We don't want to get to this type of scenario where we've got standing water or water trapped underneath. So we're watering lightly but frequently on our newly planted grass seeds. Typically on a hot day, that could be watering as much as 3 or 4 times a day because we want to keep just the soil of that ground wet, because that's right where the surface, or right where that seeds are going to be, is just right at that soil surface. Again, waiting till mid-September, typically on cooler, calmer days, we're going to maybe be able to get away with watering once per day, or maybe once even every couple of days. But again, regardless of how often we need to water, we want to make sure we do it gently so as not to wash the seed away. But here's where a lot of people mess up when it comes to watering. They set their irrigation clocks to water 3 times a day, and they just leave it that way. And that's great for newly planted grass seed, but for an established lawn, we really need to switch our water gradually to watering maybe once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week at the most. And in those types of scenarios, what we're trying to do is we're trying to apply a lot of water at once. So we water the soil deeply, and then we allow time for water to dry out of the soil before we apply more. It's called deep and infrequent watering. Basically, this is going to allow and encourage our root systems to grow deeper down into the soil, which is going to help our grass seed handle the heat of the next summer that much better. Usually we want to make sure we're watering in the morning and not late in the evening, because morning watering is going to help us prevent diseases like brown patch. We can also just wait for our grass to tell us when it needs watered. Usually our tall fescue lawns will kind of get a bluish gray cast when they start to get dry. And you'll also be able to see in those types of scenario, when you walk across the lawn, your footprints are going to get left in the lawn and they're not going to pop back up. And that's because there's not enough water inside the plant in order to help that lawn grass pop up right away. So ideally, once that grass is established after a few weeks, we only want to be putting down about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week. I'd encourage you to set out a tuna can, a Tupperware with a rock in the bottom, and measure it to see how long you have to water in order to get that 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water over the course of the week. But ideally, if you've done these things, this is what you're going to see in your lawn after a few short days to weeks. So if you're planting, just to recap, make sure you're using a high quality grass seed. Apply that grass seed in partial amounts, but in multiple directions, crisscrossing the ground. Make sure you keep that grass seed moist, because you have to keep it from drying out in order for that new, young, sensitive grass seed to be able to survive. We also then want to mow that grass seed once it starts to reach a height of about 3 inches. That'll be the perfect time to get it watered. If we're going to plant sod, this is acceptable to do this time of year. There's disadvantages and advantages of sod versus seed. And typically the biggest advantage of seed rather than sod is usually going to be a much higher cost. The sod, though, is going to give you an instant lawn. It's going to tolerate traffic a lot sooner and help you control erosion. Typically, though, I think oftentimes where we plant sod, or it's most helpful, the biggest advantage is it extends the time of the year where we can plant grass, because sod already comes with an existing root system. So if we're going to plant sod, because it has that existing root system, we can really plant it during more times of the year. September is still ideal to plant sod, and usually September to early November is an acceptable time to get your sod planted. Usually we can still plant in November to early December, but that's going to vary on the year and how quickly we get into winter. And March to mid-May is also a great time to plant sod as well. The biggest thing is we will need to be able to plant that sod before we get to the heat of summer or the dead of winter, because those are the times where sod is just not going to establish very well. If you do plant sod, essentially you want to make sure that you're purchasing freshly cut sod that's healthy and not dried out. You want to make sure that you plant it immediately after purchase so that it doesn't dry out, because if it dries out, all the roots are going to dry out and it's going to be much harder to get that to recover. With sod, just like seed, we really want to loosen the soil and level it out so that it's nice and broken up for those grass roots to start to grow into immediately. With sod, you kind of want to plant it in this brick-like pattern where we're alternating our lines across the lawn. You want to make sure that you don't stretch the sod as you apply it, because sod will shrink as it dries, and those cracks that are left in between the sod pieces are often a place where weeds will pop up as a result. And if we're going to plant sod on a sloped area, we often may need to stake it so that it doesn't slide down that hill as you water. When planting sod, one of the things you'll want to do at the end is make sure you're using a lightweight roller to roll across the sod immediately after you've laid it, to just kind of pack it down lightly against the soil to make sure it's got good contact. You'll also want to make sure that you irrigate heavily to make sure that you're not only watering the sod, but you want to get the ground underneath the sod as well. It's way too easy to run your irrigation system for maybe 10-15 minutes and that saturates the sod. But if the water's not getting down below into the soil, your grass roots are not going to get down into that soil as quickly. So typically under ideal conditions, your sod's going to be able to root within about 14 days. And once it's established, you'll have to water it a little less frequently then. So I'll take a few questions if there are any, and otherwise we'll move on to fertilization next.
Yeah, it does look like there are some. One person asked, how much does the soil test cost?
So it depends on what nutrients you want to test for. Typically our basic soil tests through most extension offices are going to be $20, and that's going to test the soil pH, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels of your soil, and your organic matter as well. You can test for all kinds of additional micronutrients, but those are just basically added on based on the price of those tests.
Great. Okay. I think you mentioned this, but someone was asking about where to purchase grass seed. I know you'd mentioned big box stores and the issues with that seed.
So I would focus on purchasing grass seeds through your local nurseries, garden centers, feed and seed stores. A lot of those places will have higher quality grass seed, but you can find good quality grass seed in a lot of places. Just again, make sure you read the label to distinguish if it's really a good grass seed or not, and not just the branding on the bag.
Okay, and the last question was someone asked if you would talk about buffalo grass.
Yes, so buffalo grass, you're going to go through all those same steps that we just talked about, but instead of doing it in the fall, you're going to want to do it in May or June. Buffalo grass, it needs a lot less seed per area, and so typically buffalo grass seed is a little more expensive as a result, but you need far less. You're talking maybe 2 pounds of grass seed per 1,000 square feet versus 6 to 8. So buffalo grass is a great low maintenance lawn to grow. I've got a little bit of it in my backyard in a patch, and it does fantastic, but it's, again, the same process, just a little bit different time of year.
Great, that's all the questions we have so far.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to jump on in then to fertilization, because now is the ideal time to do that too. And with fertilization, ideally what we're trying to do is get our lawn to go from this on the left to this on the right. And I realize maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration. We maybe don't want that much growth, but fertilization's primary point is to get increased growth out of our lawns. So why September? Why is now the ideal time to start thinking about this? Because fertilizing in September is going to encourage a healthy root system to develop. Those nutrients are going to get put into root growth rather than just excess shoot growth like a spring fertilization may do. So this is going to create an overall denser lawn, and it's also going to create a lawn that can handle all the rest of the year better because it has a deeper, denser root system. Fall fertilization is also going to help reduce winter damage by creating a food reserve within the plant. And our fall fertilizations are really what's going to help our grass green up earlier in the spring rather than putting down fertilizer then. And to give you an example, we don't fertilize the lawn at the extension office, we fertilize our trees. And we applied fertilizer around our trees last November, or November 2017 here in this example, or 2016. And by March, you could already see the areas where we had fertilized around the tree, because the grass in those areas was able to take advantage of that fall fertilization. And so you can see all the brown areas that haven't greened up yet because they were not fall fertilized. So you really can tell the difference in this photo and in a lot of scenarios when you apply those fall fertilizers. If we're applying fertilizers in the fall, typically we're doing it 3 times a year, 2 to 3 times a year. September is the most important time to do it. And usually if you only fertilize your tall fescue once a year, do it in September. Usually we want to apply between 1/2 pound and 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet when we fertilize. If you are going to fertilize again in the fall, do it in November. This is really the application that helps your grass green up earlier next spring. So fertilizing in November gives you a lawn greener in the spring earlier. So this is the second most important time. Usually if you do fertilize in November, you want about 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And you want to make sure that you are using a quick release fertilizer so it's released into the soil and to the grass before we get to the dead of winter. If you were going to fertilize tall fescue in the spring, you can fertilize in May, but you have to use a slow release fertilizer. Don't do it earlier than May because the weeds will take advantage of more of the fertilizer than your grass will. And we can also have a lot more disease problems with early spring fertilization as well. With fertilizer, I said we want to apply about 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That is not 1 pound of fertilizer, and that's because no fertilizer is 100% nitrogen. So an example of a nitrogen fertilizer here is this nitrate of soda. It has 3 numbers on the bag. This is what we call the fertilizer analysis. And basically what those 3 numbers tell us is it tells us the percent of nitrogen with the first number, the percent of phosphorus with the second number, and the percent of potassium in the third number. So this nitrate of soda is 16% nitrogen fertilizer. So if we want to apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet using a 16% nitrogen fertilizer, we'll actually need about 7 pounds of fertilizer per 1,000 square feet. So you're probably sitting there thinking, whoa, what did he just say? Don't panic about the math. In your handout tonight, you received a link to our fall fertilizer guide. This will walk you through step by step, trying to determine how much fertilizer you need for your lawn. And I love this because on the second page of this publication, it has a chart for 1 pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So if we're using, in this example, a 23% nitrogen fertilizer, and we have a 10,000 square foot lawn, we're going to need 43 pounds of fertilizer in order to apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So regardless of what percent of nitrogen you are using in your fertilizer and what percent of air or what square footage of area you are covering, this chart, you'll just line up those 2 numbers and see how many pounds of fertilizer you need to purchase and apply. The important thing with any kind of fertilization though is please take a minute to make sure you sweep off or use the leaf blower to blow off any fertilizer off of our sidewalks, driveways, and curbs. All of that water flows down the curb into the gutter and eventually leads directly to our community ponds and waterways. And you see it far too often where people are even blowing leaves and grass into the gutters. All of these things break down into nutrients, which causes pollution in our waterways. So you can really make a huge impact in the quality of our water and the quality of our community ponds by taking a minute to sweep off the driveways, sweep off the sidewalks, and make sure those things aren't running down the street. The next thing we want to make sure we talk about is aerating your lawn. And we talked about that core aeration machine a minute ago, where it punches holes in the lawn. And this is really going to be important for reducing compaction in our soil. Maybe we have kids or pets, or we're out there all the time, constantly going across the lawn and causing soil compaction. Compacted soils cause weak, thin turf grass, and weeds are often able to take advantage of those areas a lot sooner. So by aerating, we're getting rid of thatch that might be building up. We're helping water and nutrients infiltrate deeper into the soil. And we're also offering more oxygen supply to the roots of the plants, because roots need oxygen just like we do. So basically, by aerating, what we're doing is we're improving the soil health and therefore encouraging deeper, stronger root systems. And the healthier the root system is, the better our plants are going to perform all year long. There's lots of different ways that you can go about aerating. We showed the core aeration a minute ago, and that's typically going to be the most effective by actually punching those holes and removing a plug of soil. But there's also spiking, which is essentially a metal spike that just punches a hole but doesn't remove soil. Verticutting or power raking can also help control your thatch and give you a little aeration in your soil as well. Earthworms are going to be nature's aerators, and we want to encourage them in the lawn as much as possible. But sometimes in heavy clay soils, we really need to core aerate in order to help reduce that compaction and improve root health. So typically with our core aeration, we want to make sure we get 2 to 3 inch deep cores. And typically we want to go over that lawn with the core aerator machine until those holes are about 3 inches apart. Typically that's going to take 2, maybe 3 passes or more across the lawn, but that is going to give us the biggest impact in the lawn. If we're going to core aerate, do it before you put down fertilizer. Do it before you put down grass seed. Do it before you put down any weed control pre-emergence. Leave those cores on the soil surface. Allow them to break down naturally and refill in those holes within a week or so. That's going to help decompose your thatch and, again, really just improve your soil health. And research shows it really takes 3 consecutive years of core aerating once a year to really get the full benefit of core aeration. You'll see benefits the first year, you'll see benefits the second year, but it's really after that 3rd year that you are really going to start to see a noticeable improvement in the overall health of your lawn. So the results are definitely worth the wait. Any quick questions before we move on to controlling weeds?
Looks like there's a couple. One person asked, what if I need to overseed and fertilize? Which should I do first?
Typically, you can do both in the exact same day. The only thing is just make sure those fertilizers don't contain any weed control products mixed in with the granular, because again, those weed control products, like we'll talk about in a minute, may influence your grass's ability to germinate seeds. But most fertilizers aren't going to contain that, and it would be safe to apply both at the same time and water them both in thoroughly afterwards.
Okay. Someone asked, what are your thoughts on liquid versus dry fertilizer?
That's a great question. Both are extremely effective. Typically, your granular products are just easier to apply. You can put them in the same spreader that you put your grass seed. You have to calibrate it a little differently, but usually the granular products are just a little bit easier to apply. Both are going to be effective though. So it's just a matter of what you have the equipment for and have the ability to do.
Okay, and the last question asked so far, what can I do this fall to reduce crabgrass in my lawn next spring?
Great question. Crabgrass, we're going to cover here in just a minute. It's going to die out on its own here with the first freezes and frosts. Nothing with crabgrass is going to happen until next spring, and next spring new seeds of crabgrass are going to start to grow. So we want to focus on preventing them. And I may back up to the previous question just a second on liquid fertilizer versus granular fertilizer. I think if we're really focusing on nitrogen fertilization, when we water nitrogen fertilizers, nitrogen moves along with the water. So we can apply those nitrogen fertilizers to the surface, and they are going to move with the water down deeper into the soil where the roots can access them. Other nutrients are not as movable with water. Some of them will sit on the soil surface like phosphorus and potassium, which is why we want to apply them after we core aerate, so they fall down into those holes deeper down into the roots. So there are places where a liquid fertilizer may be more effective in helping get that fertilizer deeper into the soil, but with nitrogen, set it on the surface, broadcast it across the lawn, and the water will help get it down deep.
Great.
Good. Let's get to weed control so we can get you all off and home and in bed or wherever you need to be tonight. So what defines a weed? And, you know, this is a really sensitive topic to a lot of people, and we're really not going to get into what's a weed and what's not a weed, because the answer for each one of you tonight is going to be different. But basically, a weed is defined as any plant out of place. That could be a petunia in a sidewalk crack. That could be a dandelion in your lawn. That could be a red tulip in a flower bed of yellow tulips. Any of those things could be a weed because they're all plants that are maybe out of place where we don't want them to grow. So weeds, the bottom line are weeds are what you make them. All plants have benefits, including some of our weeds, but if you don't want it in your lawn or you don't want that plant growing where it's growing, it's a weed. And the best thing we can do for our lawns to control weeds is to have a healthy lawn. Do all the things that we've talked about so far, because having a healthy lawn creates plant competition. And a healthy lawn is going to be able to outcompete the majority of the lawns that we may have to, or the majority of the weeds we may have to deal with, including crabgrass. So just to recap some of those best management practices that are really going to help us reduce lawns, make sure that we're not overcrowding our grass, because they're going to crowd out the weeds. So we want to make sure that we are mowing at the proper height. Typically with tall fescue, that's going to be a mowing height of 2 to 3 inches tall that's left behind after we mow. Don't mow too low, because mowing too low can increase light to the soil, which is going to encourage weeds to grow. And don't wait too long in between mowings, because again, that's an opportunity for weeds to take over. Also make sure we're watering correctly. Oftentimes we mention people are watering every day, and that's going to encourage healthy weeds rather than healthy lawns. So we want to make sure that we're not overwatering or watering too frequently, because both of those tend to favor weeds versus healthy lawns. Our lawns typically become less competitive, and therefore weeds are able to outcompete our lawn. For a tall fescue lawn, that's typically about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week. On our warm season grasses, that's much less water. That's 1 good watering every 2 weeks. Proper fertilization is also critical. Don't over fertilize, and don't fertilize in the non-ideal times of the year. Fertilizing in the spring typically benefits our weeds more than it's going to benefit our lawn. People love to do it. That's when you see all the big box stores advertising fertilizer sales, but that is not the ideal time to benefit our tall fescue lawns. So with tall fescue, again, September and November is the ideal time to fertilize. Our warm season grasses, though, are going to be in the summer months. And make sure we're reducing compaction by core aerating. A healthy root system is going to help increase competition. And when we have compacted soils, typically our root systems are less competitive, and our clay soils are definitely going to be more prone to soil compaction. We can still do all of these things right, though, and still get weeds to be a problem in our lawn. We just have tough weeds out there. So why worry about weed control now? Because oftentimes people are worried about weeds in the spring and in the summer, not the fall. But fall is ideal for weed control because the temperatures are cool, which means plants are moving nutrients out of the leaves and down into the roots as they prepare to overwinter. That means when we apply chemicals to the leaves, we are really successful at getting them to kill the entire weed, root and all, and not just burning the leaves off the ground. Where a lot of our spring weed control applications, the weeds will continue to actively grow because they're pushing nutrients out of the roots into the leaves, and it's harder for those chemicals to be effective. So hopefully you're not in a situation where you have to do this to control weeds. And I have to laugh, but I feel like sometimes we get to that point where we're frustrated. If we have existing weeds growing in our lawn, it's important to identify what they are. Some of our annual weeds that grow just for a short period of the year, like crabgrass, they're going to die and at the first freeze or frost of this year and no longer be a problem. They're going to come back from new seeds rather than an existing root system. But any of those perennial weeds that come back year after the same roots, things like things like dandelions or clovers, weeds like that, we have two categories of chemicals we can use to control those types of weeds. There are selective chemicals that kill only certain types of plants and are usually safe on lawns without damaging the lawn. There's also non-selective chemicals, things like the glyphosate we talked about earlier, that kill all weeds that are all green plants that they're sprayed on. And oftentimes we can be very successful at controlling our weeds selectively through some of the broadleaf weed control products out there. Usually they're going to be safe on lawns and effective on weeds, including some of our tough to control weeds. So we want to make sure that we're applying those selective products typically for most of those weeds in the October to early November timeframe. Usually our weeds like dandelions, for example, are going to produce one one last round of flowers and seeds in the late September timeframe. So by waiting till October, we're not only going to get the existing weeds that have been growing all summer, but we're also going to get those new weeds that are just starting to grow and very susceptible to control. But with any weed control product, like we've mentioned several times, make sure you are being very careful on any newly planted lawn. Typically, all weed control products are going to have some sort of waiting period between when it's safe to apply the product and when it's safe to plant new grass seed. Usually it's 4 weeks, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but usually longer. So always read the label and check for the section of the label that talks about planting intervals, or when it's safe to plant grass seed after applying this product. Most newly planted lawns, after you plant the grass seed, they need to be mowed at least 2 to 3 times before those selective products are safe on those new grass seedlings. Even though the product may be safe to apply to tall fescue, it could still damage your baby grass seedlings because they're just a little more sensitive. And keep in mind, not all grass chemicals are going to be safe on all types of plants. Typically with selective weed control, we're going to find a wide variety of products, but most contain a combination of these 3 active ingredients: 2,4-D, dicamba, and MCPP. And so when we look at some of these specific weeds like dandelions, if you consider this a weed in your lawn, you will apply that in the late October to early November timeframe for the best results. Usually you can use those combination products that can contain 2,4-D, MCPP, and dicamba, and they will be very effective at that time of year. Because it's a little later in the year, we may want to consider products with the active ingredient carfentrazone. And basically this product is effective when it's still a little bit colder out. So maybe it's closer to November and the temperatures are below 50. Carfentrazone will still get us good control even once it's a little bit colder. If we have some other tough to control weeds, things like cranesbill geranium this winter, white clover, wild violets, usually on these products, we'll want to use an active ingredient called triclopyr. Again, we'd apply that in the late October to early November timeframe, but we want to do that, use this active ingredient because it will be more effective in controlling these specific weeds. Poison ivy falls into that as well. There are other selective post-emergent controls, and we'll talk about controlling crabgrass in a minute, but often one of the active ingredients you see out there is quinclorac, and this is going to be a selective post-emergent product that's going to be effective on controlling grassy weeds, especially summer grassy weeds like crabgrass, grassy sandbur, bindweed, barnyard grass. So if we get to the middle of the summer and we start to see some of these weeds pop up, quinclorac is a great active ingredient to look for to get good control on some of these types of weeds like that. A weed I personally struggle with a lot, and I know a lot of people do, is yellow nutsedge. Yellow nutsedge is not technically a grass. It actually looks like a grass, but it's a sedge. If you look very closely at the weed as it comes up, it's going to have a triangular stem or a 3-sided stem. And typically we're going to look for active ingredients like halosulfuron and sulfentrazone as the active ingredients to really get effective control against nutsedge. Usually with nutsedge, we have to apply this in the late spring to early summer, really right as that nutsedge starts to come up. Otherwise, it produces little nutlets underground, those tubers, and then that allows nutsedge to come back in the future. A lot of people recognize nutsedge because it grows faster than your lawn grass will. So you can mow, and 2 to 3 days later, these nutsedge grasses will be sticking out above your lawn, kind of a yellowish green color because they grow much faster than your turf grass will. We also have a lot of annual weeds that people may want to control, things like chickweed or henbit. Many of these winter weeds or annual weeds that come back every year from seeds have a couple different ways that they can be controlled. Annual weeds are going to be weeds that germinate in the fall, like henbit and chickweed. And these are going to be noticeable in the spring. They're actually growing they're going to start growing very soon, and they're going to be present in the lawn all summer long, but they wait until the spring temperatures warm up before their growth really explodes. But they're already growing before that happens. So with that, there's 2 control options. You can either control them effectively with the selective products that we talked about, the combination product of like 2,4-D, MCPP, and dicamba in the late October to early November timeframe. But your second option is to use a pre-emergent product. And basically what these pre-emergent products do is they prevent weed seeds from growing. They kill the weed seeds right as they start to grow. And so this is the perfect way to control things like henbit, chickweed, and even crabgrass. The important thing to note with the pre-emergence is it prevents all seeds from growing. So it doesn't know the difference between a grass seed and a weed seed. So be very careful when you're using pre-emergent products and you plan to plant grass or have recently planted grass seed. You don't want to stop your grass seed from growing with these products. There's lots of different active ingredients available, but typically prodiamine and dithiopyr, barricade and dimension as they're commonly called, are going to give you season-long control, meaning you're going to be able to apply them once in the fall and get control all winter long and into the spring of those annual weeds like henbit and chickweed. These are also the active ingredients you want to look for to control crabgrass. But with crabgrass, you need to put down these pre-emergents in the spring rather than right now, because they only work for a certain period of time. So for crabgrass control, use prodiamine or dithiopyr, barricade or dimension, and put it down when the red bud trees or the purple flowering trees start to bloom in our area. If you want to control your winter weeds though, annual bluegrass, henbit, chickweed, you want to put those pre-emergent products down very soon from this mid-August to mid-September timeframe. And that's going to give you prevention of these weeds all winter long and into the early spring. Some people struggle with little barley. It's a grassy weed with kind of a brush-like seed head, often gets stuck in the pet's paws. And with these, we want to use pre-emergence in mid-August. And so it's not too late, get it down, but get it down soon. Usually with this, you'll have to use either dimension, which is dithiopyr, or Fertilizing, which is going to be sold under things like surfland weed and impede. So I know I've thrown out a ton of information at you tonight, and I really appreciate you sticking around with me to discuss all of the fall lawn care things that you can have. But I do want to take some time, answer as many questions as you have. And if we're not able to answer your questions, please know tonight that we do have a garden hotline that is open Monday through Friday from 9 to noon and 1 to 4. It's free. We give out research university-based information. You can call us, you can email us, or you can come visit us in person. And our team of Master Gardener volunteers are there to answer your questions. So if there's a question that you think of once we leave tonight, feel free to reach out to us later. We are always there to help answer questions. So I'll see what kind of questions you've got in the chat box, and look forward to visiting with you more.
Okay. Looks like one person had a question. I consider creeping Charlie a weed. What can I do to kill it? My neighbor's lawn is full of it and it has invaded ours.
Good question. So one of the tricky things about weeds is often weeds are going to have multiple common names. So I'm going to search right here to double check what weed we're talking about. And it looks like creeping Charlie most commonly refers to a ground ivy. And so with a ground ivy like that, you'll want to either use a pre-emergent to stop new seeds of that from growing, or your post-emergent products will work too. If you'd like to reach out to us after this presentation, we'd be happy to, well, we're not going to be answering the phone tonight, but tomorrow, I'd be happy to visit with you more specifically on which weed you're talking about. And if you have some pictures, I want to make sure we give you the best recommendations there. And so I'd be happy to be as specific as you want later this week or next.
Okay. One person asked, they have some bindweed creeping into their yard, and what should they use to kill that?
So we saw on the slide a little bit ago, quinclorac is a great bindweed control option. It's very effective. And typically though, just be careful that you're not applying it on things that it's not safe to apply on. Usually quinclorac you can apply to your lawn, and most turf grasses won't be damaged. But again, make sure you read and follow the label instructions. Glyphosate, your Kills-All or Roundup based products with the active ingredient glyphosate is also extremely effective on bindweed as well. You're going to have to probably have a couple applications. One application is not going to cut it because bindweed has a really intense deep root system, but you can get control of it, and those two products will be very effective. Just again, read and follow the label instructions carefully. and it'll cover what it's safe to apply on and what it's not.
Okay. And then what about Bermuda in a fescue lawn? What can someone do about that?
That is a tough question. So typically the problem with a lot of our weedy grasses, the other crops that we talked about in our seed, Bermuda grasses, a lot of our grasses, it's impossible to select and remove one type of grass that's growing in another type of grass. And so Bermuda control is difficult. Usually the most effective way to eliminate Bermuda out of the lawn is to completely kill it off. Use glyphosate midsummer, completely kill off either the entire lawn or the section that you're having Bermuda problems with, and even a few feet beyond. Kill it, wait 2 weeks, and spray it again. Typically, again, Bermuda is not one of those weeds that's going to be controlled with one application. It may take 2 or 3. And it's also going to help if you water your Bermuda grass really well before you apply those products. Basically, that eliminates heat stress or drought stress on the plant, makes that Bermuda grass actively grow, and then it will be more effective at absorbing those weed control products like glyphosate on it. Typically, though, Bermuda grass needs to be sprayed when it's hot because once we start to get into fall, the activity is going to decrease. Another option for Bermuda grass suppression is to use triclopyr. We talked about that active ingredient a minute ago when we talked about violets and cranesbill geranium. What triclopyr is going to do is it's going to be safe to apply on tall fescue that's established, but it's going to suppress or partially kill the Bermuda grass. So you may get some suppression, but it's likely not going to completely eradicate the Bermuda. So you could use this as a way to suppress the Bermuda to keep it back or to partially control it. But again, repeat applications are going to be needed because it's not going to be perfectly effective.